the people who serve on standing committee, the people who serve on executive council, the delegates to this body. Everybody's elected. It is not a pure democracy. It's a representative democracy. So like our country, we have people who are elected to represent. We don't have one person, one vote. It's an exciting process. And the annual convention of an Episcopal diocese is the time that we come together and legislate. We look at resolutions, including the resolutions on our budget. And the Diocese of California has had lively legislative life, I would say its whole life. Certainly the 17 years I've been your bishop, we've debated and voted on many meaningful legislative pieces. We do the same thing in the General Convention of the Episcopal Church, which happens, generally speaking, every 3 years. We're going to have one in Louisville, Kentucky this coming summer, which will elect a new presiding bishop. At the General Convention, your deputation and I, as your bishop, and your new bishop coadjutor, God willing, in June of this next year, will look at somewhere near 500 pieces of legislation. Many people have called legislation at the diocesan level and at the level of the Episcopal Church, so what legislation? Meaning, so what that the Episcopal Church thinks this or that about it. As you know, I represent Presiding Bishop Curry to the United Nations Climate Summits. This one will be perhaps the most important since the Paris Accords. And I say that because if we do not have urgent action, ambitious action on climate at this COP, we will sail past the 1.5 degrees Celsius ceiling that is the last safe level for life on the planet. One of the key pieces to that more ambitious work that we need to do is something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We have not passed that resolution or something that would support it at the General Convention. I lobbed a request last week to Michael Barlow, the Secretary of the General Convention, who was my first canon to the ordinary here, and our dear friend, still canonically resident in California, to Presiding Bishop Curry, and to President of the House of Deputies, Julia Ayala Harris, asking them this week, when they met as the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, to consider a resolution to allow me to speak and the delegation to speak to this treaty in the United Arab Emirates in December. They passed it, and while it is not a General Convention resolution, it will allow us to speak with some legislative authority. I give you that as an example. That's how we do policy in the Episcopal Church, and it does matter. What you do matters. We are also a Christian body, a family, a body, a field, a building, all these metaphors that St. Paul used for what the church is. And when we come together at our annual convention and every 3 years at the General Convention, we are a family coming together to worship together, to pray together, to enjoy what it is to be called into the beloved community as conscious people who value peace and love. I think that's equally as important, maybe more important, than our legislative agendas and our church democracy. Both these things are part of the 174th Convention of the Diocese of California. I'd like to begin us with a prayer. I'll do the same, gathering us with a prayer tomorrow morning. We begin with morning prayer tomorrow morning. But today and this evening, mindful of the conflicts in the world that are so devastating to so many people and affect us, of course, since we are all so deeply interconnected, I'd like to pray for peace. I will tell you that we will have a special guest tomorrow, Rabbi Jonathan Singer, one of the head rabbis of our dear friend, Temple Emmanuel, which is only a mile and a half from here on Arguello, will join us right after lunch tomorrow and speak with us, pray with us, and we will give him assurances of our love and solidarity with him and the people of Emmanuel and all of the people who are in harm's way in the Holy Land and here in our own country. May God be with you. Let us pray. Eternal God, in whose perfect kingdom no sword is drawn but the sword of righteousness, no strength known but the strength of love, so mightily spread abroad your Spirit, that all peoples may be gathered under the banner of the Prince of Peace, as children of one parent God, to whom be both dominion and glory, now and forever. Amen. It's my pleasure now to turn the leadership of this pre-convention meeting over to my dear friend, Brother Richard Edward Helmer, the secretary of the convention, and to Ellie, who is the chair of Dispatch, who has been doing such beautiful work as communications for the diocese and who has flown in from her remote location of Chicago to help us in person. And to my left is my canon to the ordinary, Deborah Lowe Skinner. And then there's a whole group of wonderful people in front of me whom you cannot see. I've commandeered Stephanie Martin Taylor's laptop for this time. So if you see Stephanie Martin Taylor, it's because we couldn't quite change that attribution. And as Brother Richard Edwards says, well, it is Halloween. So we have different identities tonight. So God bless you all. I will see you in the morning, and I look forward to a great 174th convention.
Thank you, Bishop Mark, and thank you to all of you for being here this evening. It's great to welcome you virtually to start with at Grace Cathedral, and we look forward to seeing many of you here in person in 3 dimensions. Wear your costumes. Oh, scratch that. But we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'm going to ask Ellie to speak in just a moment. Ellie Simpson, who's the chair of Dispatch of Business. We're going to be talking with you about some things that will help you get oriented first thing tomorrow morning when you arrive. And so, Ellie, over to you to talk a little bit about our transportation and parking here tomorrow.
Hello, everyone. We just have a reminder to you all that parking and transportation will be limited, especially because the parking garage, the Masonic parking garage, is unavailable for us to use. Tomorrow, they're hosting their own event there. So please do arrive early. Plan to find parking on our website, the convention website. We have several different parking garages listed that you can reserve spots at and that you can check out if our garage is full. The garage here is open from 5:30 in the morning for those of you who are early birds and decide to get here before it ends up filling out. And that is what we have as far as parking and transportation. Do come early, use transport, and have a buddy with you. I'm going to pass it over to Brother Richard, who is going to do a tour of the layout and space that we're going to be sharing tomorrow.
So good evening again, everybody. You can see I am walking through the narthex of our beloved cathedral here at Grace. This is where you will be entering the cathedral tomorrow. If you come in through the Gresham Hall level from the parking garage, you can come right up on the elevator here, or through the door on the left side as you're facing the cathedral when you come in. The main entrance here. We will have the cathedral to ourselves tomorrow. When you first enter, you will see the baptistry here, and to your left will be the registration tables for both clergy and lay delegates. This is where you will pick up a name tag. Your name tag is critically important tomorrow. It will have on it your VPOL login information. And your first task after picking up your name tag tomorrow will be to log on to vPoll. We'll be using the vPoll system as we have over the past 3 conventions for you to register that you are here, and we will use it for our quorum count. And remember, Francis is watching you. Over here to the right, if you need assistance logging into vPoll after you receive your credentials tomorrow morning, you can come over here to the tables on the right. This is also the location if you have needed to reserve a device for your use during convention, it will be available for you here. Tomorrow for convention itself, after you've registered, after you've gotten onto vPoll, you can come right into our seating areas for the convention. Our primary seating area will be right here in the central part of the nave. You will see over to the left a screen. For those who need closed captioning, there'll be a reserved section right up here, close to the front on the left side. The closed captioning screen you see right there in front of the pillar. There'll be a main screen where everybody can see what's happening on the dais up here on high, whether you're sitting close to the back or sitting up front. Right now we have the ambo here for our liturgy tomorrow. This will be moved out of the way when we go into actual session tomorrow morning. There will be 2 locations for microphones for people to get up and speak. One will be right here at the front of the nave. You can see the mark on the ground. We'll have a microphone there. And then we have another point right here in the middle of the nave. I see a question has come up. Chris Rankin Williams has asked, will seating be by congregation? The honest answer is that is up to you. If you all agree to sit together, you are more than welcome to do that, but we do not have reserved sections for congregations at this time. On the left side, you can see the area that will be reserved for our captioner and also our vPoll directors. And our voting secretary is hard at work right now, getting ready for our voting tomorrow. On the left side of the nave will be our 3rd microphone. And this is something we're going to come back to repeatedly, but when you get up to speak tomorrow, at any time and you approach a microphone, if you're first or second in line, make sure you grab an appropriate colored card. Green card is for yes or in support of the motion. The red card is no or in opposition to the motion, or if you wish to amend, or if you have a question of procedure or order. It'll be important for you to hold up the appropriately colored card so that Bishop Mark can see it and call appropriately when we move into debate. Again, this will be the location here on the left side of the nave for our 3rd microphone. In the south transept, that's on the California Street side of the cathedral, you can see we have a specially designated area for people who require extra COVID precautions tomorrow. This place will be required masking only, and you can see we have socially distanced seating. We ask that this area be kept and reserved for people who, for medical reasons, need extra space for COVID precautions. There'll be a screen for this area here so they can see what's happening on the dais. Now I'm going to cross over back in front, the dais area. You can see the dais right here. You can see our brave chair of dispatch hard at work, following everything that's going on, where our president, Bishop Mark, will be sitting. And our parliamentarian looks very much like Stephanie Martin Taylor I told you it was close to Halloween. And our candidate to the ordinary. Over here is our production table, including our queen of Zoom, Karen Miles, and our production team, Fabiola, and it's a wave high. And then again, our voting secretary is hard at work. Over here on the right side of the nave, we have Brother Angel, who is one of our key interpreters tomorrow. Brother Angel, wave. In case you didn't notice, the Gregorians are taking over the convention this year. And here in the North Transept on the plaza side, we have a dedicated section for our Spanish-speaking members. They requested a section where they could caucus together and also speak in Spanish. And you can see they're preparing for the fiesta. Also over in this section of the cathedral, we have our fourth microphone. We ask that this microphone be reserved for any members of convention who require non-simultaneous translation. This will make it possible for our translators and interpreters to be close at hand for members of convention who require that when they address convention. It's a good opportunity for me to remind you, when you are addressing convention, it is appropriate not to speak to the floor, as it were, but instead to speak always to the chair, that is the bishop. So all of our microphones have direct sight lines to the bishop. This time we'll take a quick pause and check in, see if there are any questions. You can leave your questions in the Q&A section. We'll be happy to answer those, and then we'll move a little bit further into the orientation. Okay, your questions are welcome throughout the evening. Something, of course, is very essential is, where are the facilities for tomorrow? We're going to be here together for several hours. So the bathrooms at the Gresham Hall level of the cathedral will be open all day. We'll also have bathrooms open on the same level as the nave across the plaza in the chapter house. Ellie, can I turn back over to you to talk a little bit about lunch on the plaza tomorrow?
Hello. In recognition of this being Bishop Mark's final annual convention with us, we are having a special lunch that will be held on the plaza and has been organized very graciously by Nina. And so we are excited to have lunch with you all. It is at a set time, so we will for sure be breaking for lunch at 12 p.m. And we look forward to eating with you all. The menu is posted on the website. If you are concerned about dietary restrictions, please take a look at that and see if you need to bring anything additional to supplement the food for yourself. And I will turn it back over to you, brother.
A few key reminders. The first one is parliamentary. If you have an amendment that you are planning to make to any of the resolutions tomorrow, it is critically important that you get me those amendments in writing. You can do that by sending them to secretary@diocal.org. The reason we ask for them in writing is so that we can make absolutely sure we know what your intention is. We can clarify that with you if we need to, and we can also show the convention what the language of the amendment looks like when it comes up for debate and discussion. So well before the matter that you wish to amend comes up on the agenda, please get me that amendment in writing. You can send it to secretary@diocal.org. secretary@diocal.org. And I will get back to you as soon as I receive it and let you know if I have any questions so we can make sure it gets in good order. Another reminder is that registration tomorrow opens at 7:45 a.m. The doors to the cathedral will open at 7:30. So plan accordingly as you're working out your transportation. We will begin with an in-person orientation at 8:45 and get underway at 9 o'clock. So once again, the doors open at 7:30. Registration begins at 7:45. At 8:45, we will have a brief in-person orientation followed by a start at 9 o'clock. Be there or be square. For those of you who are concerned about alternates becoming delegates tomorrow, I'm going to talk you through the process. And if you have any questions about that, you can contact me, or you can contact Denise Obando or Karen Miles. We are all part of the Committee on Credentials. Need to be very clear. We're being very careful this year, but this is true in any year. Alternates have to be elected by their congregations or their vestry or bishops committee. They can't simply be appointed. If an elected alternate is to be substituted in as a delegate, in other words, if a regular delegate cannot make this convention and an alternate wishes to step in, we need an email or something in writing from the clergy in charge of your congregation. Needs to come from the clergy in charge of your congregation. If you do not have clergy in charge of your congregation at this time, please send a note from one of your wardens, and I will have the bishop review that request to swap in one of your alternates. We need to receive that in advance. You can send that to us by email. Again, you can send it to me at secretary@diocal.org, and we'll make sure that the alternate gets properly credentialed, has a name tag waiting for them tomorrow, and gets seated with voice and vote. Plan to bring your devices. You're going to need one for the V-poll. And bring your devices fully charged. And if you have any extra charging batteries, bring those with you. We will have some areas here where you can plug in devices as you need during the day. But the more that you can bring your own portable charging equipment, the better off we'll be. Throughout the day, we're going to have techs on the floor of convention to help with any V-poll issues that arise. During our regular votes, if you do encounter a problem with V-poll and need technical support, you'll simply raise your hand and we'll make sure someone gets to you promptly. Okay.
I will hop in. I've seen a few questions about V-poll and prepping for that. You do not need to download anything in advance. You can come. We'll have people who help set it up. And your credentials will be here on the back of your name tag when you check in. So no need to worry. Just come and we will be here to assist anybody who needs assistance with V-poll support and login.
I saw a question about who can raise amendments. Can entire congregations or parishes raise amendments? The short answer to that is no. It's not that congregations may not work on amendments together. They may, but one person, one delegate or cleric, in good standing, a member of convention, must raise the amendment and must also make the motion to move the amendment when the time comes during debate. So if your congregation is working on a particular amendment and wishes it brought, you need to designate a member of convention, either an elected delegate or one of your clergy, to raise it as a motion.
I also want to bring special attention today to our exhibitor hall, which this year will be in the chapter room. We have 12-ish people who are churches, organizations who've signed up. So definitely plan to visit them during your lunch or during breaks, and bring a bag to be able to tote home some of the goodies that you will receive both from them and from others around the area.
Finally, just a reminder where you can find the agenda for convention. It's posted as an individual link right on the diocalconvention.org website. You can find it there as an independent document. It is also found on page 3 of the convention booklet, which is also linked at the same site, diocalconvention.org. I think that covers our orientation for now, unless there are any other questions that we can help address. All right, then. We're going to turn to the next item on our agenda. We're right on time at 5:30. Going to turn the floor over to the Reverend Stephen Siptroth, who's going to give us the report, the initial report, I should say, from the Committee on Nominations. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Brother Richard. Ellie, is the slide presentation coming up?
Stand by.
Stephanie is currently bringing it up.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is the Reverend Stephen Siptroth, and this year I had the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Committee on Nominations. Our report to convention will be in 2 parts. This evening, I'll provide an overview of this year's nominations process and the 2023 nominees. And tomorrow morning, Don Miller, one of our members, will introduce the nominees and move their names into nomination. Next slide, please. First, I would like to extend a huge thanks to the amazing people who came together on the Committee on Nominations. I am incredibly grateful for their gifts and skills and leadership. They include the Reverend James Dolan and Don Miller from the Alameda Deanery, myself from the Contra Costa Deanery, Sister Dana Augustine and William Burrell from the Marin Deanery, Patrick Anderson and Susan Hill from the San Francisco Deanery, the Reverend Jane Stratford as our liaison from the Standing Committee, Carolyn George as our liaison from the Executive Council. I'd also like to thank Brother Richard for supporting us in so many ways this year, right up until the day before the convention began. Next slide, please. This year, much of our work began in May and continued through mid-October. During that time, we advertised and announced the nominations period. We received nominations. We worked with nominees to submit biographical materials. We responded to several questions raised by nominees and their nominators. And we worked with diocesan staff to confirm that all nominees satisfied the anti-racism and safe church training requirements. Also this year, Ellie Simpson, chair of the Committee on Dispatch of Business, advised us of that committee's concern regarding equity in the nominations process. Following receipt of that concern, Don Miller and I worked to prepare a set of written recommendations for nominees to consider when preparing their biographical statements and taking photographs for the convention booklet and website. We also included recommendations that nominees could look to learn how they could introduce themselves to the diocese, including at deanery meetings. It's our hope that this resource will help future nominees who are underprivileged or unfamiliar with the nominations process. Things like how to take an effective photograph or write an effective biographical statement may be familiar to nominees and nominators that are familiar with the nominations process, but they may not be readily known to nominees who are new to that process or who come from underprivileged backgrounds. Next slide, please. Our nominees this year, and that includes all of them, including the ones who decided they needed to withdraw from the process, are remarkable and faithful and committed people. And all of us on the committee are so grateful that we had the opportunity to work with and walk with all of them. What we have is a wonderful slate of people, and now the nominees are. For the Standing Committee, Gretchen Lintner from the lay order, and the Reverend Audrey Miskelly. For the Executive Council, from the lay order, Tish Bussell, Stephen DuPont Kalani, and George Strait. Following the late withdrawal of the Reverend Jason Lucas Green yesterday, the clergy nominee for Executive Council is the Reverend Anna Marie Hoos. For Treasurer of the Diocese, there is one nominee, Lane Ringley, and for Secretary of the Convention, there is one nominee, the Reverend Brother Richard Edward Helmer. Don Miller will introduce these nominees to you in greater detail, and you can also read about them on the convention website or in the convention booklet. Next slide, please. Finally, this evening, I would like to extend a warm word of thanks to everyone who supported this process and was involved in this process. I thank the Committee on Nominations members and our Standing Committee and Executive Council liaisons for their amazing work this year. Again, many thanks to Brother Richard for answering several technical questions and addressing issues as they came up, right up until Thursday evening. And a huge thank you to our diocesan staff, Amy Cook and Karen Miles, who supported us and who confirmed training requirements and tracked nominees' progress toward completing those requirements. I'd also like to say that we are incredibly grateful for Ellie Simpson, who did so much amazing work on behalf of the committee from start to finish, including updating web pages and responding to several other requests for assistance between May and October. Ellie, thank you. You were simply amazing, and I really appreciate your help. Electing leaders is a process of discernment, and I would like to thank each of the nominees and their nominators for being raised into that process, for stepping into that process, including the nominees who had to withdraw. All of our nominees are faithful, dedicated people who stepped forward out of love for their church, and I hope we can all be grateful for that. May God grant us discerning minds and hearts as we cast ballots for each office tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for your diligent work and for the diligent work of the entire Committee on Nominations and for everyone who offered themselves to this process of discernment. Are there any questions at this point about nominations for tomorrow? Seeing none, we all get to take a 10-minute stretch break. We will meet back here at 5:50 and start presentations and questions on the resolutions. Thank you again all for being here, and we'll see you again in just a few minutes.
How's that? The story of my life. Yeah, good. Then I don't have to worry about the power. Oh, I better do the language, the translation thing. Captions, raise hands. Just make sure I get the language thing. Interpretation, English, captions. It's always good to have that.
Somebody's mic is on.
Me, it's probably me.
All right, everybody, we're going to start up again here in about a minute. All right, good to have you all with us again this evening. I'm going to turn the floor over to the chair of the Committee on Resolutions. And just to let you know about how this will work, each of our resolutions tonight will be presented for about 5 minutes or less. And then we'll have an additional 5 minutes for questions to be addressed to the presenters. And what you can do to address a question is you can put it in the Q&A section of the Zoom channel here. And we will make sure that those questions get relayed to the presenters and they can answer them in front of the whole convention. So we can get any issues of clarity cleared up tonight. And this will help make our process of debate tomorrow even smoother. So Dave Franquist, I'm going to turn things over to you. Here is our illustrious Secretary Emeritus and also the chair of our Committee on Resolutions, Mr. Dave Franquist.
Hi, I hope I'm being heard well enough. The Committee on Resolutions is a great group of people to work with. I really want to thank everybody on the committee for their tremendous work this year. They include Ms. E.J. Hilliard, the Reverend Stephanie Green, the Reverend Deacon Pam Jester, the Reverend Darren Miner, Ms. Brenda Pullen, and Ms. Lisa Perry. We had the great good fortune of having only 4 resolutions submitted to us by the deadline and 1 resolution after the deadline. So even though we're a bit shorthanded, we were able to get the work done. Everybody worked very hard on these resolutions. I want to compliment all the sponsors and proponents of resolutions for the hard work they did and the way they worked with us. This was a good collaborative effort. We're going to take the resolutions in numeric order. That's not the order they will be heard tomorrow, but it seems like the simplest way to go. So our first resolution is resolution number 1, Migration with Dignity. And I'd like to invite Reverend Ruth Myers to speak to that.
Thank you, Dave. I trust everybody can hear me. This resolution is entitled Migration with Dignity. The concept of migration with dignity came from Kiribati, which is an island nation in the Central Pacific Ocean. Because of sea level rise, people in Kiribati are losing their homes and need to find new places to live. So in 2014, the president of Kiribati, Anote Tong, developed this framework of migration with dignity to summarize what he believed his people deserved, what they wanted, what they needed as they migrated and found new homes and new ways to live. President Tong identified a universal right of movement, rights of security, equality, and quality of life, rights to access basic services, civil and political rights. In the Episcopal Church, fast forward about 10 years, a group of leaders who have been working in border ministries and in large cities that have been receiving migrants picked up this migration with dignity framework. They realized that it summarized their commitments, that it is consistent with Scripture and with our baptismal covenant. They saw that these pillars of migration with dignity could address any number of situations that we're confronting, actually not only here in the United States, but in all of the countries where the Episcopal Church has dioceses, because migration is a global concern. So this church-wide network of advocates for migrants developed a resolution for General Convention, and I offered to bring it to the Diocese of California. The resolution that's before you, Resolution 1, has two primary purposes. So first, it's a resolution for next summer's General Convention. If adopted by the Diocese of California, then everything that is indented underneath the first resolve clause, so all of the non-bolded resolve clauses, would be submitted to General Convention for its consideration. This part of the resolution sets out the pillars of migration with dignity, and it calls for the Episcopal Church, for congregations, dioceses, the Church's Office of Government Relations, as well as individual Episcopalians, to advocate for migration with dignity. These principles of migration with dignity provide an overarching framework that would enable the Church to respond to emerging issues and concerns as the political landscape changes, as the government institutes new policies and practices. Many members of this diocese General Convention deputation have endorsed this resolution and so are prepared to support it at the General Convention. Several other dioceses are considering similar resolutions for General Convention. For us to adopt this resolution would allow the Diocese of California to add its voice to those of other dioceses, and so increase the likelihood that General Convention will adopt these principles. So first, the resolution is a resolution for next summer's General Convention, and then second, it offers guidance for ministry in this diocese as congregations and individuals engage in ministries of advocacy and accompaniment with migrants. So ministry might develop as grassroots efforts that build as congregations share their experiences. A future diocesan convention might call for further action. So I bring this resolution to you with the hope that it will strengthen existing ministries in the diocese, that it will open new possibilities and ideas for ministries of advocacy and accompaniment. And I'm ready to take your questions if there are any.
Just a reminder, you're warmly invited to put questions for Ruth about Resolution 1, Migration with Dignity, in the Q&A part of the Zoom. Any questions for Resolution 1, Migration with Dignity?
So seeing no questions, I'm presuming that we can move on to the next resolution. Our second resolution, number 2, is addressing gun violence to safeguard our youth. And presenting that resolution is Jeanette Dinwiddie Moore. Jeanette.
Good evening, everyone. I am Jeanette Dinwiddie Moore, a member of St. Paul's, Oakland, and member of the Executive Council, the Afro-Anglican Commission, and the Union of Black Episcopalians. Resolution number 2, addressing gun violence to safeguard our youth, focuses on one method of safe and secure gun storage practices as a means for reducing gun violence in our communities. And I'm going to keep it short and sweet because I think many of you have already heard me present this at your deanery meetings. But we all know that we're in an epidemic right now of gun violence, and almost daily there's someone being killed by gun violence, and mass shootings like the one this week are at an all-time high. Our children and young people are afraid to go to school, play, or enjoy their lives due to gun violence. So this resolution focuses on safe and secure gun storage practices as one solution. What it asks us to do first is that this resolution requests that the information in the resolution on gun violence will be sent to all diocesan churches and affiliated organizations. And they'd be asked to encourage their members and employees to commit to using safe and secure gun storage practices. This would be us as Episcopalians leading the way and being the example for change in our communities. Secondly, this resolution asks the convention to direct the Secretary of Convention to provide copies of this resolution and its supporting information to each of the school districts within the Diocese of California. And we ask them to expeditiously comply with the recently adopted Education Code section requiring annual notification of each parent, legal guardian, and caregiver of their responsibility to safely and securely store guns, firearms, and keep them out of the hands of children and youth as required by California law. No, I'm not an expert on gun violence prevention, safety, or regulations, nor are the young people or the adults listed as submitters of this resolution. But we all just believe that whatever little change we can make to save a life, particularly our children and youth, and create environments where they can thrive and blossom without fear of being shot is just so important. Any life we can save is very important. And we believe that by using the safe and secure gun storage practices, we will see a real reduction in the gun violence occurring in our communities. So we're just asking our church to lead by examples and just create a better environment for our young people and youth where they can play, go to school, have fun, live their lives without the fear of being shot. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for presenting on resolution number 2, addressing gun violence to safeguard our youth. We are receiving some questions in the Q&A. The first one was raised by Carl Deal, who has a question about the possibility of including a directive that liability insurance for guns be required of every gun owner, and wondered if that might have been considered at some point in the development of this resolution.
No, we didn't look at that because, as I mentioned earlier, we were just focusing on looking at gun storage as a vehicle to try to create change. We didn't get into other issues related to or other mechanisms.
Thank you very much. Another question that was raised from Reverend Sylvia, I believe Reverend Sylvia Vasquez. Does the resolution include gun storage in cars?
No, but it's broad enough that, I mean, if you're safely and securing your guns, you should be safe and you should be doing it in your cars or wherever you are, just so kids do not have an opportunity to get the guns. So it doesn't specifically say that, but I think the intent is wherever you have your guns stored, they should be safe and secured.
And Father Justin Cannon raised a question about the threat of assault weapons, which are often used at school shootings. What would it mean to take this forward to advocate as a diocese for banning assault-style weapons?
Well, the language in the resolution mentions not only guns, but firearms. So assault style weapons would be a firearm. So it's not specifically included, but I think the intent is covered there again.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions about resolution number 2, addressing gun violence to safeguard our youth?
I've been asked to make sure that you have enough time to type your questions, so we'll pause here for a bit to make sure there are no more questions coming in. Okay, thank you, Jeanette. Our next resolution, number 3, is the legislative themes for the 81st General Convention. And presenting this resolution is a member of our deputation to that convention, Sarah Lawton. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm on.
Yep.
Okay.
We can indeed. Yep.
Thank you. So I am Sarah Lawton. I'm a lay delegate to this convention from St. John the Evangelist in the Mission District of San Francisco. And I am one of the co-chairs of our General Convention deputation, along with the Very Reverend Eric Matoye, who is my co-chair. Just a background on what even this is for. It's a memorial. A memorial is a kind of mind of the house. It's not a resolution that creates specific action. It's a way to let our deputation know and the General Convention know what issues are of concern from the Diocese of California. That there's an explanation of what that looks like in the convention booklet, in the explanation portion of this resolution. So this would send a memorial with us, your deputation, to General Convention, and we would use it as a bit of a template, an understanding of what we're being asked to focus on. I need to tell you that as deputies, we don't get told exactly what to do by this convention or by the Diocese of California. We carry our own conscience with us, and of course, issues will come up well beyond these issues here. But we will definitely be holding these issues in mind as we go to Louisville in next June. We crafted this because we wanted to stimulate some conversation around the diocese about what we might be focusing on. So that's why the memorial. I want to let you know who we are. You can find this on the DioCal website, but just so you can hear it. There's me, I'm one of the co-chairs, Eric Matoye, as I mentioned, the other clergy deputies, and there are 4 clergy and 4 lay, and then we have 4 clergy alternates and 4 lay alternates. So the others are the Reverend Brother Richard Edward Helmer, whom you know very well from this convention, the Very Reverend Dr., he's from Our Savior Mill Valley, the Very Reverend Dr. Deborah White, Grace Martinez, the Reverend Dr. Ruth Myers from All Souls Berkeley and CDSP. The lay deputies are myself, Warren Wong from St. James in San Francisco, Canon Christopher Hayes from Grace, Laura Curlin from St. Cyprian's. Our alternates are the Reverend Dr. Cameron Partridge from St. Aidan, San Francisco, the Reverend Canon Deborah Lowe Skinner from Grace, the Reverend Dr. Mauricio Wilson from St. Paul's in Oakland, the Reverend Jennifer Nelson from St. Bart's and St. Clair's, Southern Alameda County. And our lay alternates are Karma Quick Panwala from Grace Cathedral, Emily Hopkins from St. Paul's Walnut Creek, Ron Hermanson from Grace Cathedral, and Joseph Daschel from St. Augustine's in Oakland. And I wanted to list everyone because I want you to know that how we're going to carry out this very extensive, you might say, laundry list of issues is that we're all going to work together. We're a team, and we've been meeting for almost a year. We take on issues and we take on legislative committees at convention, and we track legislation, we make legislation, we bring forward planks, or we follow those resolutions that others have brought forward from around the church. And we're a very hardworking group. I think might say one of the best I would say one of the best deputations in the whole church. Just working really hard together as a whole team of 16 people, even though only 8 of us are on the floor at any given moment. Some of the issues, you can see them here, are racial justice and reconciliation. We've been working on this at General Convention for some time. There are some important internal church issues, and we'll be getting reports as well from a committee that's meeting this weekend on boarding schools and historic ties to slavery and what we might do about the fact that our church is implicated in those issues, as well as how to support public policy. We're one of the leading deputations on LGBTQ advocacy, including trans and non-binary, as well as all kinds of inclusion. Gender justice was actually added as part of our discussions around the deaneries. Really appreciate that came up. It's something that we've been working on since 2018 pretty intensively anyway, both in terms of public policy and in terms of sexism within the church. And we look forward to continuing that. So that's something we added through the deanery process. And the same with ageism, which we haven't done a lot of, but we'd like to engage in that, and we really appreciate those who raised that issue. Climate justice is something that we've been a leader on, thanks to particularly the leadership of our Bishop Mark. Disability justice, which has been raised by Karma Quick Panwala especially, and we have joined her in supporting that. Economic justice, those are some of the justice planks, and we're really strong on those. And then there are a number of internal church issues, internal and external church vitality, congregational development, new pathways for ministry collaboration, especially given some of the challenges that we're facing in a post-Christian world. Funding the Church of the Future, the same. Lay formation, I'm a lay for life person, and it's really important as we look to the future that we empower our lay leaders. Theological education, which is also undergoing a lot of change. And then finally, liturgy and music, particularly laying the foundation for prayer book revision for both for fully authorizing as part of the Book of Common Prayer our gender neutral language for marriage, but also expansive language referring to God and the people of God, and expressions that are culturally diverse for our prayer book and for our various hymnals. So those are the things that we're focusing on. As I've mentioned, there will be other things, but we really hope that this will be a foundation for us to report back to you in a year as well. So we'll be working on all these things, but we can look back 1 year from now and say, what did we do in terms of these particular planks that you all have had a chance to discuss through the deanery process and at convention. And then finally, just to let you know, a lot of us participate in lots of groups at convention. There are some official caucuses, Deputies of Color Caucus, which some of us are members of, the LGBTQ caucus, again, some of us are members of, an Under 40 caucus, which Laura Curlin is a steering committee member of, and a new Green Caucus that Emily Hopkins, along with others, Warren Wong and others, are looking to establish. So we participate in those, as well as various parachurch organizations, Episcopal Peace Fellowship, for example, Union of Black Episcopalians, other groups. So we're very busy at convention, and we will be bringing these as well as other planks as they emerge. And I'll just leave it there. I don't know if my co-chair Eric Matoye wants to say anything. I said he's batting cleanup on this presentation, and of course we'll take questions.
We look forward to your questions. Thank you, Deputy Lawton.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Father Eric. We have one question from Gary Perkins. If you were asked to name some of the successes we've had in any of these areas, what would you highlight?
Well, past successes. We worked really, really hard for gender inclusive marriage rights, and we finally won those. I mean, over many years, and we won those at least on a trial basis in 2015, and now we're trying to incorporate those services. They're authorized services now, but we'd like to incorporate them into the Book of Common Prayer officially. So that's something that we've been working on. Racial justice and reconciliation, we've also starting really in 2015, since Michael Curry was first elected as presiding bishop, we've worked really hard to get significant funding, and we continue to work toward that. And some initiatives, for example, examining our role in boarding schools for Native Americans and the harm that did intergenerationally to Native American Indigenous people. Gender justice, we just won a reestablishment of a position to be a director for women's and also LGBTQ sort of gender justice ministries across the church, and that's a hire that will be made in the next couple of months, I hope. So these are some of the things that we've done. Maybe Eric can add.
So I wanted to note from the chat that Deputy Jennifer Nelson reminded us that two resolutions from our convention of 3 years ago were approved by the House of Deputies on Juneteenth as a recognized commemoration of the church, as well as our anti-lynching work of supporting the anti-lynching bill. I cannot speak highly enough of Deputy Karma's work of raising the attention to disability access in the wider church. This was something she's been working on with our support and the support of the wider church for 3 conventions of access in sign interpretation, access into buildings. As some of us may know, some of our buildings you just can't enter. Thank you, Deputy Curlin, for the resolution, connecting us to the resolutions of 2022. And I will leave it at that. So thank you for the question of wondering what we've done in the past. We look forward to coming back at the convention, at our diocesan convention of 2024, to report back on the work that we've done.
I think last time we had our hands in, we as a deputation had our hands in well over 100 resolutions in various ways. So we're really, really active as a deputation, and we work as a team. We work as a group. I can't emphasize that enough either.
The only other question in the Q&A right now is asking if there's any work right now on the question of Israel and Palestine, which is obviously a very hot and lively issue. And I just want to raise that up in case any members of our deputation are aware of current work going on in that area right now at the church-wide level. I know there's conversation here on the ground of the diocese, and we'll be hearing more about that tomorrow.
I can say that Executive Council just made a statement today, just passed a resolution. They're meeting, Executive Council of the Church is meeting this week, and they just made a statement. And if you go to, anyone who's interested in what we've said in the past, we've made a number of public statements. And if you go to the Office of Government Relations, which runs our Episcopal Public Policy Network, they have a whole section, I think, on their website, Office of Government Relations. I'll find it and put it in the chat on our past statements on Israel-Palestine. I can't really speak to what's happening right now. I'm sure there will be discussion at the convention coming up. It's hard to know what to say with the fog of war that we're in now, other than to say I would look at the statement that Executive Council put out. We support the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem in many ways, including several of their initiatives in Gaza. One of them is the El Ali Hospital, and we have a position of not investing in companies, not in all of Israel, but companies that contribute to the occupation. So it's a nuanced policy, and that would tend to be our public policy as well.
So the check, for those who have subscribed to Episcopal News Service, go there to find the most recent statements from the Executive Council. And of course, we are fervently praying for peace and cooler heads in the Holy Land, Israel and Palestine at this time.
I'll put some links in the chat when I'm off doing the webinar thing.
Are there any other questions?
See any more questions coming in? Relative to Resolution 3?
Thank you all.
I think we'll move on now to Resolution 4, which is to add Howard Thurman to the Episcopal Church calendar. And the Very Reverend Eric Metoyer will be speaking to that.
Thank you, Honorable Secretary and Honorable Secretary Emeritus and delegates to convention. Thank you for this time. As mentioned, I am Eric Metoyer, Regional Dean for San Francisco in our diocese, and also co-chair of our deputation to General Convention. The resolution for Howard Thurman essentially speaks for itself. For those who are unfamiliar with with Dr. Thurman, please read the resolution. My very 50,000-foot overview will just say how important he is as a theologian. And not only his work as a theologian, but also as a philosopher and a poet. Many of us read the songs of Christmas, The Mood of Christmas, his book of poetry and reflections on Christmas. Many of us also have read Jesus and the Disinherited, his seminal work on the belief and the recognition of Jesus, the Christ, who walks with the poor and those who are disenfranchised, and always have, as you saw in the resolution, reminding us not to make division by mind and soul and strength much ever search, to find the way by which road to all men's need of thee go. This is the highway of the Lord. What brought us to this now is recognizing we are reaching a point where we can bring Dr. Thurman into our hallowed lesser feast of fast for commemoration. It is time he would be added along with other great Christian leaders of our past, of Pauli Murray, of Barbara Harris, of Martin King, and the list goes on. There's a particular California connection, which some people may know, some people may not. In 1944, Dr. Thurman left Marsh, working at BU at Marsh Chapel, to found the Church of the Fellowship of All People, one of the first racially integrated churches in the country, deliberately formed as a racially integrated church, recognizing that, as Dr. King noted, the greatest separation of our peoples is at 10 o'clock on Sunday between Black and white in America. The church still exists. If you get a chance, please visit. Dr. Dorsey Blake is one of the great inheritors of his mantle. It's on Larkin and I think Mason. But don't forget to go back to your own parish after visiting. What I also just want to raise is this is something close to us. We read his work. We try to practice the theology and the philosophy that he has for us of always making the marginalized, the poor, the neglected part of our vision for a wider church, which is why his work is part of the Standing on Sacred Ground series that I hope and pray every parish in our diocese is a participant. So I thank you for this time to be able to address you. Please read the resolution. I ask your support, and I give thanks to the writers of this resolution, Brother Richard Edward Helmer of Our Savior in Mill Valley, Ms. Jeanette Dinwiddie Moore, St. Paul's in Oakland, and the endorsers from the Union of Black Episcopalians and the Afro-Anglican Commission of this diocese, Reverend Dr. Michael Barham and Reverend Vicki Gray. I am here to answer your questions, but again, urge your support and thank you, Convention, for your time.
Thank you again, Father Eric, for presenting on this resolution that's near and dear to my heart, and I think the hearts of many of our members of Convention. We have a few questions here that may further illuminate Howard Thurman's place in the life of our church. And the first one from David Mundy is, did Howard Thurman have a special connection to the Episcopal Church?
He was one of the canons of St. John, the Cathedral of St. John and Divine in New York. Dr. Martin Luther King studied under him at BU for his doctoral work, and certainly Episcopalians have studied under him, including the very Reverend Dr. Sandy Wilson, my mentor, who is now Dean of Cathedral in the Diocese of the West Indies. She was one of his students here in San Francisco when he had a special course for theologians. So there is a connection to the Episcopal Church.
Thank you. Father Justin Cannon has asked a question. Have there been any local commemorations of Thurman within our diocese, distinct from just appreciation of his works? Has his saintliness been commemorated here by congregations?
I will admit I don't know, although much of Jesus and the Disinherited certainly has been read and has been quoted throughout this diocese for many years. This resolution, I believe, will also add this to our local commemorations, as we did with Peter and Annie Cassie, the Reverend Peter and Annie Cassie, the educators and evangelists from the latter half of the 19th century. I just want to also add that the Diocese of Northern California also is putting a resolution forward, and our understanding is there will be at least a couple of more dioceses across the Episcopal Church who will be adding resolutions asking for the recognition and commemoration of Dr. Thurman.
Thank you. That also addresses a question from Terry Moore about other dioceses sponsoring resolutions on Howard Thurman. Are there any other questions on resolution number 4, adding Howard Thurman to the Episcopal Church calendar?
All right.
So, seeing no
Sure.
other questions,
Saints of the Church, I thank you so much for your time and a blessed evening to you all.
thank you very much, Eric. We have one more resolution to hear about, and this resolution was not presented to the Committee on Resolutions until after the deadline because the issues that it addresses were not known, particularly to the members of this diocese before the deadline. And we are grateful that the sponsors did come to the committee for our advice and were quite willing to work with us. And we want to point out that because this resolution came in after the deadline, it will be necessary for the convention to agree to hear it under the rules, and that the convention will require a 2/3 vote in order to bring it to the floor for debate and voting. That will happen very early in our proceedings tomorrow, right after I make my formal report to the convention. The resolution is resolution number 5, access to prison ministries. We have 2 presenters lined up on this, the Very Reverend Deb White and the Reverend Dr. Cameron Partridge, and I'm not sure which of you is going to speak first. So please jump in according to what you've decided to do.
Thank you, David. I'm Reverend Deb White. I'm first tonight. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for hearing about Resolution 5, which is sponsored by the Deputation to General Convention. It was submitted past the resolution's deadline, as David said, but we will believe you will understand the importance of considering and approving it once you hear about it. Resolution 5 addresses the importance of participating in prison ministry with integrity. The Episcopal Church supports interfaith and multi-faith ministries with a particular emphasis on serving marginalized people. Resolution 5 affirms the following: that we engage in ministries across theological differences without judging or seeking to change the theological beliefs of our partners, that all people have the right to engage in ministry, that while it is important to attempt to remain in relationship with long-standing prison ministry partners, it is equally important to ask them to change any code of conduct which requires Episcopalians to violate our own canons. And finally, that the Episcopal Church is firmly committed to prison ministry that is consistent with our stated policy to minister to and with all God's children. Kairos Prison Ministry International is a large multi-faith organization. In August of 2023, Christina Reich, a parishioner of Grace Martinez, discovered that the code of conduct that Kairos requires its volunteers to sign as a prerequisite of participation precludes LGBTQI+ individuals from ministering in this program. Requiring Episcopal volunteers to sign this code puts them in violation of the non-discrimination canons of the Episcopal Church. It is also inconsistent with our baptismal vows to seek and serve Christ in all persons. As a result of her discovery, Christina resigned. As she poignantly wrote to us, as Episcopalians, we must remember our baptismal vows, especially our 5th, to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. In order to be part of this ministry, we all need to sign our name to applications and affiliation agreements that say we will uphold all the policies of KPMI. How can we do this? This is not common ground. It is hurtful. This ministry literally saved my life. The love I experienced in Kairos was incomprehensible. I want this ministry to thrive, but I want everyone to receive what I was blessed to receive. Resolution 5 seeks to make Christina's dream a reality. Cameron?
Hello. As Reverend Deb has shared, this resolution was prompted by a recent discovery that Kairos International now requires its volunteers to sign a code of conduct that precludes the participation of LGBTQ and, rather specifically, openly transgender volunteers in its program. To sign such a document, especially if one is trans or non-binary, is to undermine one's own dignity and that of any trans or non-binary person who is incarcerated, even if trans people may have quietly and uneventfully participated in this program in the past on a quasi don't ask, don't tell basis. It is also important to emphasize that the passage of this resolution would not preclude our participation in all ecumenical or interreligious efforts, nor would it negate the crucial importance of connecting across theological differences. I think we congregations or individuals can figure out best ways to engage or not engage with groups or individuals in various shared opportunities to make a difference in our world, despite profound theological differences that we may have, whether interfaith or ecumenical contexts. Indeed, I think this is a time in our country, in our world, in our church, when it is more important than ever to engage across theological and political divides. But we cannot confuse such engagement with literally signing on to policies that conflict with or even in fact violate our own hard-won non-discrimination canons. The resolution emphasizes, as Reverend Deb said, our continuing commitment to ministries to and with people who are incarcerated, and indeed to and with people of various experiences who are marginalized, in a spirit of seeking liberation, justice, and the building up of beloved community. All of us are on a journey seeking to the best of our ability to live out our baptismal covenant and to minister in ways that are consistent with our non-discrimination canons. We would appreciate your thoughtful support for this carefully constructed resolution. Thank you.
And we'd be
Thank
happy
you,
to answer
Dean.
questions. And quickly before we do, we'd like to thank Brother Richard Edward Helmer in particular for helping us to shape the resolution, and the other members of the General Convention deputation for assisting with getting this together rather quickly, and for the committee that has been meeting to talk about the Kairos issue.
Thank you, Dean and Cam, for leading us in this critical work. The first question that we have received from Andrew Lovan asks, is there a plan to communicate the results of this resolution to the leadership of Kairos? And if so, through what channels?
Thank you, Andy, for that question. So quickly, when we found out about this, we sent the word out. We've had several meetings of a kind of an ad hoc group of individuals that are interested in this, including people that participate in the ministry, not just people that are in leadership positions in the diocese. And basically, we've developed kind of a three-prong approach to this. One of those is to communicate with Kairos, and we have attempted to do that in a couple of ways, but we are trying to kind of raise the stakes. And one of the things that this resolution would hopefully do is bring this to the attention of the General Convention, and that way we could kind of engage with them on a higher level. So this would bring that attention and that ability to communicate kind of in a beyond Deb and Cameron way to Kairos. And then the second part of that is that we want to consider, if we are unable to work with Kairos after this, to make sure that prison ministry continues and how we might do this. So this resolution affirms both of those things, although there are not specific plans for doing them at this point. I see Jim's question, Jim Wyatt. Hi, Jim. And the answer to that question is no. Our understanding is that restriction has been there, but our folks, especially Tina, who brought it to our attention, were completely unaware of it until a meeting that happened in August, which is why this all came together in August. It had been very quietly written in, but it had not been verbally gone over, to my understanding, and that happened at a meeting in August, and that's what initiated this. Just trying to, Dana, is this a legal issue as well? It is a legal issue for the prison system, and we are trying to figure out where that falls, because California has very strict anti-discrimination. Was that an earthquake? Everybody kind of ducked that I saw on camera. We just had an earthquake, everybody. Which means that God is in favor of the resolution, clearly. Actually, and Chris has the same, Chris Rankin-Williams, you have the same question. It should, our original thought was that because of California's anti-discrimination rules, that it would in fact imperil that prison ministry. But my understanding is that there are exceptions for church based on communities of faith being able to practice their beliefs. So we're still looking into the legalities of it. And I thought I saw one more question. I lost the other question. If Brother Richard Edward can help me.
There are a number of questions here
I
in the
see.
chat.
I'm scrolling. Is there a plan to address other dioceses where Kairos has prison ministries? Yes, that's why we would like this to pass in California, so that we can take it to General Convention and have a broader conversation. How many people are involved in this particular prison ministry? We've had trouble answering that, Gabriela. But we found in a quick Google search, and thank you to Stephanie Martin Taylor for doing that legwork, that at least 44 dioceses, including the National Cathedral, mentioned Kairos as a partner for prison ministry on their websites, which means that all of those dioceses and folks volunteering were probably unaware of this. The National Cathedral has since taken it off its website, as has the Episcopal Church. I'm curious to know, what is Kairos? That's kind of beyond my scope at this point, but it's an international prison ministry. It advertises itself as multi-denominational and says, if you read the resolution, it gives a description that uses their language of who they are. So you can find that language in the resolution. If it doesn't receive 2/3 floor, can it come back last year? That's your question, Brother Richard Edward or David.
The short answer is yes. It would need to be raised again by a delegate or a cleric of convention and brought to the Committee on Resolutions for formal review and then submission to the convention.
Yes, so thank you for answering that. Does Kairos pertain to LGBTQ ministers or inmates, or both? So I refer you to the written version of the resolution, which actually has the language that is in the code of conduct and how they frame that. How would Kairos respond in a way that would help us remain in partnership with them? We would like them to remove the offending language. And again, you can refer to that in the actual resolution. If Kairos refuses to change its policy, is the goal to end any connection? The goal is to not to continue our prison ministry with Kairos, but to develop a prison ministry that allows opportunities for all people of all genders and sexual preferences to minister and be ministered to. we have tried to, Jim Ward, again, we have tried to contact Kairos, and we are hoping that if we can bring this to General Convention, that gives us, as I would put it, a little more juice to get them to answer us, which they have not done so far. Do we need to go to their board? Yes, there are plans to go to the local board. Tina wrote her actual resignation letter, and they were not particularly responsive to that.
I wanted to thank Eric Nefsted, who asked about the Right Reverend Ann Ratonia, the suffragan bishop for federal ministry. And we, to my knowledge, have not been in conversation with her about this, and it would be really great to bring her into the conversation. And I also wanted to thank Molly, who had a comment about having been dismissed from a team in 2017 for being gay. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
I'll just add that I have reached out to the bishop in charge of federal prison ministries. I have not yet received a response, but this is something we are actively following up on. It is important to note that we are not clear yet on the activity of Kairos at the level of federal prisons. They seem to be more active on the ground in state prisons.
Thank you for that.
I think if it's all right with you all, we are over time at this point, but this is a very lively conversation, and I will note to all of convention that this is something that can continue tomorrow during discussion and debate if you all agree to bring this to the floor. Again, that procedural motion will be happening in the morning shortly after the presentation of the Committee on Resolutions. Deb and Cam, do you have anything else you want to add before we wind up this evening?
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you. And thank you for the lively engagement.
Thank you. We are a little bit behind in our agenda, but here's what I suggest we do. We're going to go ahead and have a presentation on all of the constitution and canonical amendments proposed together in one sitting, and then we'll take a 5-minute break and turn to our interim reports from task forces. So at this time, if Christopher Hayes, Sherry Lund, and Laura Curlin could go ahead and join me as panelists, we're going to walk very briefly through the proposed constitution and canonical changes that are before this convention and open up the floor for questions. These canonical changes are found in the convention booklet beginning on page 16, and we'll walk through them one by one. Sherry, if you are with us, can you speak briefly to Resolution A to amend the Constitution for lay members of Executive Council and Standing Committee as delegates of convention?
I can. Thank you very much, Brother Richard. So good evening and warmest greetings to all of you. I'm Sherry Lund, a co-sponsor of Resolution A. I want to let you know that tomorrow I'm going to be making a motion to table this resolution indefinitely. This is the process for actually just withdrawing the resolution. When I crafted this resolution, I did so because I thought it was a good idea and a fair one. I still do. Based on early feedback, I also thought that getting approval would be a simple matter. In the last few days, it has emerged that it's clearly not that simple. Our church is on a serious decline, and I feel that there are far greater priorities where we need to put our time and energy these days. I deeply love our church, and I want to know that it will exist for future generations. This is why I serve on the Executive Council. We need to unite in facing those challenges ahead and use our precious time well. A few years ago, my husband and I crafted a resolution on increasing financial transparency. It passed overwhelmingly at convention, but I would have pursued that resolution indefinitely in the face of controversy because it's such a big and important issue. I believe that this is not the case with Resolution A. Several of you have offered helpful suggestions, but these have led to additional questions and threads to pursue. It's often been the case that an issue with unexpected threads like this or unexpected controversy is referred for further study to one group or another. But honestly, I think it's often harder to just stop and move on to more important issues. So for tonight and for this convention, I'm going to instead offer the gift of unexpected extra time, Brother Richard, so we can catch up a little bit, something that's pretty hard to come by in these kinds of meetings. I want to thank you to all of those who took time to read this resolution, to comment, and to discern. Many thanks to my co-sponsor, Brother Richard, who is an amazing secretary, knowledgeable, an amazing researcher and thinker, and one of the kindest people I know. So God bless and peace. I'm going to drop off the panel at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And I just want to speak briefly to a couple of things. First of all, thank you to proposing this resolution. To say it was thought-provoking would be an egregious understatement. It was, what it brought up, I think, was very important, not only for where we are now, but where the future lies in our governance work as a diocese. I'm gonna stop opining right there, except again to say thank you. The motion that Sherry plans to bring to the floor tomorrow is a motion to postpone indefinitely. It's a fairly rare motion used in parliamentary procedure, but it is effectively a motion to ask convention to simply cease work on this resolution and leave it. It can be picked up at a later time. It can be proposed by other members of convention at future conventions, but that's what the postpone indefinitely motion does in effect. I will say that that motion, once it is seconded, is debatable, and the convention will need to vote on it in order for it to pass. If it does not pass, this resolution will still be before the convention for consideration tomorrow. Turn now to Resolution B, Canons 2 and 3, requiring anti-racism training and certification for clergy and delegates. And Laura Curlin, I believe you're presenting on this.
Yes, thank you. So Resolution B, as you said, amends Canons 2 and 3 to require anti-racism training certification for clergy and lay delegates to convention. I think it's fairly straightforward, but I want to highlight a few key details from the resolution. First, the training will be valid for 3 years at a time. The requirement would go into effect in January 2024, so it would not immediately go into effect. It would wait until January. And the resolution does not specify what particular training would meet the requirement, but that it would be managed and used for diocesan training programs. So different coursework could be selected in the future if a new program became available that better fit our needs. Anti-racism training is already required for certain roles and elected positions, but this would provide a shared baseline for clergy and lay delegates to convention, so that when we meet and act as diocesan convention, we would have a common language and foundation in this anti-racism training. This canon change does not include specific enforcement of this requirement, but it provides a start so that we can have a clear and measurable requirement going forward. I will keep that short and sweet and answer any questions that come up.
Thank you, Laura. We'll be entertaining questions here in just a moment, but first I'd like to ask Christopher Hayes to introduce 2 other resolutions concerning our canons Canon C, correct references to the Episcopal Church canons, and Canon E, ratifying and approving acts of the convention meeting remotely. We will be coming back to the special rules for the electing convention later in this meeting tonight. So Christopher, over to you on resolution C and E.
So thank you, Brother Richard Edwards. The resolution C is very simple. Our diocesan canons have a number of cross-references to the church-wide canons of the Episcopal Church. They have, in a few places, gotten outdated, and this resolution simply updates those cross-references. And because the church-wide canons sometimes get renumbered, we felt that we couldn't simply make that as an editorial change. We needed to have a clear record that the convention was authorizing the specific changes that we're making here. And I'm happy to answer questions about that if people want details, but otherwise I think that's what you need to know. Resolution E is not actually an amendment to our Constitution and canons. It however does solve a problem that came up during the era of COVID. In 2020, as I'm sure you all remember very well, there were public health orders in place that made it illegal for us to gather in person. We did not have vaccines available for COVID until several months later. So we met virtually in 2020. And one of the things we did was adopted Canon 1.02, authorizing us to meet virtually. But that leaves some of us lawyers a little concerned about the chicken and egg problem of, can you meet virtually to adopt a canon that says you can meet virtually? And then is everything you did after that still valid? So resolution E would simply declare that everything we've done at our last few conventions, 2020, 2021, and 2022, is valid, including all the acts of the convention that were adopted, and including everything that the constituents of the church did in reliance on those acts of convention. So it's just a little, just to cover us to be sure that nothing that we've done meeting remotely can be challenged in the future. And I'm happy to entertain any questions about both of those. And that one, as I said, I think is on the consent agenda. So it will not come up for a direct vote unless somebody really wants to remove it from the consent agenda.
Thank you so much, Canon Christopher. And yes, I'll confirm that both resolutions C and E are currently on the consent calendar for approval at the beginning of our business tomorrow. Again, any item can be removed from the consent calendar by a single member of convention. Just one other matter as to process. Stacy Grossman asked the question, when do we discuss canon changes? They are scheduled for action, and that includes debate tomorrow afternoon at 1:40 on the agenda. A question from Canon Anna Rossi here at Grace Cathedral asks, what body or mechanism is responsible for maintaining the records for anti-racism training? Laura, would you like to address that?
Yes, of course. So the canon change itself says that it consists of coursework managed and utilized for diocesan training programs by the bishop's office. It's not any more specific than that in the canon change itself. When we use online programs, they generally take attendance and generate records automatically, which is the current program that we recommend starting with. It is mentioned in the explanation, Church Next's Becoming Beloved Community, as one example.
Are there any other questions regarding the constitutional and canonical changes proposed for this convention? Father Leonard Oakes has asked, all diocesan conventions during 2020 to 2022 were done online. Could the inclusion to make sure those meetings are legitimate be a general convention resolution as well?
So I'll take a stab at answering that. Leonard, I don't think that's really necessary. We expect diocesan conventions to manage their own affairs, and dioceses handled the COVID challenges differently. There was at least one diocese I know of that that calculated the absolute minimum quorum and had people drive up in a drive-in movie theater parking lot so that they could adopt their canon changes to meet virtually, and that worked for them. It didn't work for us. So that's something that each diocese will handle on its own.
Are there any other questions regarding the Constitution and canons? Seeing none, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break at this point. We'll reconvene at, about 7:03. But if you can stay close, and we will move right after this into a couple of reports from our task forces, and then the presentation and question and answers regarding the bishop selection coming up in December. Thank you all. And thank you to everyone who presented on resolutions this evening and for all the hard work you've brought to bring this convention forward. Okay, we're going to come back to the final sections of our evening. And we're going to open with an interim report from the Task Force on Young Adult Ministry. Annalise, hope you're still with us, and turn the floor over to you to make the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for hanging on tonight. So yeah, this is an interim report after our first year of the Young Adult Task Force. We are going to have at least one more year of this task force. And the first year was largely exploratory. One of the things that we first discussed was who counts as young adults, which is a question that different parishes have different interpretations to the answer of. So we brainstormed a variety of answers, but first started by defining young adults as people age 18 to 35 at least, and maybe extending that up to 40. And then we talked about kind of all of the wide range of young adults within our diocese and within the church. So first, they fall into these two big buckets, I would say, recent high school graduates, which you might define as less than 5 years out, and young professionals. But even within these two big buckets, there's so many more subcategories that we spent time defining. We have four-year college students, community college students, and people who opt not to go to college or do alternative continuing education like trade schools or join the military. And then within the young professional bucket, we have young single professionals, young married professionals, and young parents, many of whom are, of course, under 35 or under 40. And the Episcopal Church, and our diocese in particular, has historically been best at serving just two of these categories, the four-year college students, and maybe in some parishes, young parents, through programs like Faithful Families. DIOCAL is currently only doing active programming via paid staff with four-year college students on a couple of campuses. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I definitely want to give a shout out to Travis, who's doing a phenomenal job in his work at Stanford. But the Task Force for Young Adult Ministry spent time asking not only how can we improve the ministries that DIOCAL already supports, especially those campus ministries which kind of died off during COVID, but also how can we support the wide breadth of young adults that those ministries are not reaching. So we had representation on our committee from a couple of different groups, lay and ordained, but we really are hoping to hear from even more voices. And we identified not only that kind of diversity of life stage, but also the importance of hearing from people all over the Bay Area, so geographic diversity, hearing from young adults from different ethnic and cultural groups, and also from young adults with a variety of interests. So there were people on the task force who thought that something like a camping trip for young adults might be a good idea, and others on the task force who were leaning more in the direction of a diocesan-wide video game competition. So it was a wide variety of interests amongst young adults, and that also can make it difficult to do this ministry. As we kept expanding our view of what diocesan young adult ministry might include, we quickly realized that there were a lot of voices missing from our conversations. There were so many people that we had questions for that we decided a good project for our first year would be to start identifying some who those people are. So we talked about getting in touch with other progressive young adult Christians, young adults in the Bay Area who don't identify as Christian or who would fall into the ever-growing none category, youth who are about to enter the young adult era, so maybe high school seniors or people who have recently graduated or taking a gap year, and the volunteers and leaders who work with them. Young parents we don't have on our committee. We didn't have any current campus chaplains, any members of intentional communities, any diocesan formation staff. And we also talked about the importance of getting in touch with the General Convention young adult leaders. So in the next phase of our task force, we hope to do three things. First is to either fold into our task force or at least consult with as many of those potential voices we identified as possible. The second is to continue to identify resources and models for young adult ministry that are effective and feasible in our current context. And the third, and perhaps the most ambitious, is to host a DIOCAL Young Adults Retreat, which we would use to gauge interest and hear from more young adults in our communities about how to best serve them. So we invite all of you to join us in this work. If you fit the description of any of the voices I described before, or even if you don't, but you just really care about young adult ministry and want to join our task force, please reach out to us. And if you have ideas or resources to share with us, please send them over. This work is necessarily and intentionally collaborative. Of all the people I know who are working in the young adult space, there is nobody who thinks they have it all figured out. None of us know what the future of the church is going to look like. And even people like me who fall squarely within that young adult age range don't necessarily know what young adult ministries will work. So if you're interested in this work, please join us. Please send us any resources that you think would be helpful. And we're excited to see where the Spirit is moving amongst the young adults of the Bay Area. Happy to take any questions now.
Thank you so much, Annalise. And I just want to point out to the convention that the written report, the written interim report of the task force is available on the DIOCAL convention website. You can find it under the reports button. Deeply appreciate the work the task force is doing.
The email for contact, I believe, is DIOCAL YA task force. Hang on, I can find that really quickly. And I'll put it in the chat once I find that. Great. It's DIOCAL_YA task force at googlegroups.com. Can I answer in here? I think so.
Yes, you can. And you can also put it in the main chat and everyone will see it there.
Okay. All right, I should be answered that question. Any other questions? Again, this work will continue for another whole year at least, and probably much longer than that. My hope at least is that we will have robust young adult ministries that will be happening long into the future. So don't hesitate to reach out.
You can see how much support there is in the questions and answers. This is amazing work, and we're so grateful for your leadership and Annalise. Thank you.
Thanks. Considering digital media, yes, we are. One of the things that somebody on the task force came up with the idea of is doing more ministry via like Discord. I know some people use Slack. There's different group channels nowadays that people can use for ministry, especially across dioceses like ours, which are quite large. And so gathering in person isn't always an option. But yes, digital media. I think people have this idea that digital media is going to save us and is like the perfect way to reach all young people, which is not necessarily true, but certainly innovative ways to use Discord and other channels like that, I think will be important. Have you been able to identify trending issues and interests particular to each group for young adult ministries? Yeah, I mean, like I talked about, we had a conversation about sort of outdoorsy groups being a significant cohort of young adults wanting to go camping or hiking or whatever. And then also people who are interested in video games or Dungeons and Dragons or like interest groups like that tend to attract a younger crowd. So that's, I mean, I think targeting certain interest groups will be a big part of our work. And I was grateful that we had a diversity of interests within our own task force.
Well, thank you again, Annalise, so much for presenting. And we're looking forward to the final report next year, but also all the work that happens in the meantime. Yes. So we're here to support any and all of that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. So next, we're going to turn to Laura Curlin, who's going to be presenting the interim report on the Task Force on Truth-Telling, Reckoning, and Reconciliation.
Hello again. So I'm still Laura Curlin, and a delegate from St. Cyprian's, and I am chairing the Task Force on Truth-Telling, Reckoning, and Healing. But before going any further, I want to recognize the members of the task force and really share my appreciation for their time and very thoughtful discussion over the past year. Reverend Hannah Cornthwaite, Reverend Jim Dolan, Luther Manning, Reverend Will Scott, Reverend Stephen Tiffenson, and there's always room for more. So last year, we passed a resolution forming this task force with the goal of assessing what our diocese has done in the past in the area of racial justice, what we're doing now, and to identify priorities for work in the future. Over the past year, we have been using recommendations from General Convention to help us gather information and consider areas of work that we might otherwise miss. Those recommendations are linked in our written report, which is on the convention website and already linked in the chat. We have also been reaching out to the rest of the diocese, for input. We've had individual conversations with some folks, and we also have a form. So if there's any fantastic work happening in your congregation or challenges that you're seeing, again, in the area of racial justice in the church, you can share it with us by email or the form linked in the chat. Some of our work has also been engaging with other groups doing similar work in the wider church, especially ongoing conversations around land acknowledgements with other dioceses in California. And we're looking forward to connecting with some other groups across the church in the next year. And the last part of what our work has consisted of has been support and participation in implementation of some of the work that's currently happening. For example, we are really looking forward to working with a new canon for racial, social, and environmental justice as soon as that position is filled. In the next year, we plan to continue this work, including collecting additional information, especially areas where we had questions, more questions than answers. We are working on collecting and updating resources on racial justice work for use in the diocese. We want to increase collaboration with UBE, Afro-Anglican Commission, Asian Pacific Islander Commission, and other groups in the diocese, as well as other groups outside of the diocese. This is, again, just one little piece of a much, much bigger scope of work. And I hope that everyone can both be interested in and participate in it in some small way, either in work happening in your individual congregations that I would like to hear about, or by working with our task force directly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Laura, for your presentation. Are there any questions for the task force on truth-telling, reckoning, and healing? All right, seeing no questions, thank you again, Laura, so much, and thank you for the critical work that the task force is doing. We look forward to the ongoing collaboration as that task force works over the next year. This time, I'd like to invite Warren Wong, President of the Standing Committee, and Paul Fromberg and Brenda Paulin to join me on the panel for a presentation and to field questions about the upcoming bishop's election in December.
Ready to get started here?
Yep.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Warren Wong, a member of St. James in San Francisco and president of Standing Committee this year. I'm honored to have my colleagues here, the Reverend Dr. Paul Fromberg and Miss Brenda Paulin from St. Augustine's to join us today as we talk about the next steps in the nomination and the process to discern and call the next Bishop of California. The focus of tonight is to present what the next steps are going to be. As you probably know, we have announced the slate candidates that on September 22nd. There were no petition candidates, so we are proceeding with the three who were the slate candidates as our final nominees for the electing convention. Afterwards, we put the schedule up for the meet and greets, which starts next Thursday. And some of that information and the dates and times and locations are posted on the website, bishopsearch.org at bishopsearch. What is it? Bishopsearch.org at DialCal. Okay. And then afterwards, there are some additional things that we'll talk about at the electing convention. But again, I'd like to introduce Paul and Brenda to tell us where we are in terms of the process today.
Brenda, you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Warren, and good evening, everyone. The Bishop Search and Transition Committee has been at work since November 2022, when we held our onboarding retreat at St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church. Since then, we have held monthly Zoom meetings, 3 additional day-long committee meetings, a 4-day candidate retreat at the Bishop's Ranch, and innumerable subcommittee meetings in person and online. The dedication of the committee members is exceptional, and their work both individually and as a group has been exemplary.
The Bishop Search and Transition Committee's work has been grounded in prayer. The entire process has been about group discernment. In the same way that a parish discernment committee would work with individuals seeking holy orders, the committee listened carefully to what each candidate said about their calling to be our bishop. We also listened to the Spirit alive in our midst. We were committed to serving the diocese in our discernment, not only our individual preferences. The question before us was always, what does the diocese need in this moment of our history for our next bishop?
Once the diocesan profile was published and the application was available, we received responses from men and women across the Episcopal Church. Demographically, applicants broadly represented the Episcopal Church. The number of applications we received was high for current bishop searches.
Each committee member reviewed the applications in preparation for our initial screening of candidates this past June. Following this meeting, we began interviews with those candidates we discerned should move forward in the process. These interviews took place via Zoom. In August, following this period of interviews, we met to discern further who would move forward in the process. These candidates were invited to the Bishop's Ranch for a 4-day retreat. 2 weeks later, we met for our final discernment meeting. After a day of prayerful, considered conversation, we fulfilled our mandate of presenting a slate of candidates to the Standing Committee. At the end of the 10-day period for petition candidates to apply, we came to where we are today, the final slate of 3 nominees.
Next week, Augusta, Austin, and Phil will begin an intense 4-day tour of the diocese, where everyone is invited to meet them and hear their responses to questions submitted by members of the diocese. In addition to the 6 formal meet and greets around the diocese, nominees will tour a few diocesan institutions and congregations. The meet and greet sessions will begin with prayer. Then each nominee will introduce themselves to the diocese. After this, each one will answer questions individually. Questions have been submitted online to the committee. The deadline for online submission of questions is 11:59 p.m. Tuesday. There will also be an opportunity to present written questions at the beginning of each session by those in attendance. Each nominee will have 25 minutes to respond to questions, and we will strive to answer as many questions as possible, given the meeting time limits. After each nominee has a chance to answer questions individually, they will return for a closing prayer.
The whole committee is grateful for the support we have received from members of the diocese. As we continue in this discernment process, we ask for your prayers and hope that you will prayerfully consider who God is calling to be our next bishop. Are there any questions?
If not, I think I'd like to raise some of the questions I think that is part of our agenda item today, which is to talk about what's in store relative to the electing convention on December the 2nd. It will be
There is
held.
a question.
Oh, go ahead.
There are some questions in the Q&A, Warren.
Let's read it.
So the first question comes from David Crossan. Will all three nominees be in the same room at the same time?
No, the nominees will be individually asked questions, and then we'll have each nominee will be in the room, and then the other two candidates will be in another room.
A question from Liz Milner, which I believe I can answer. Is there any option to vote remotely or register my vote any other way? Unfortunately, the answer is no. All voters who vote in the election for our next bishop are required to be here in person during the electing convention. The third question is just to clarify, how do we submit questions to be asked of the candidates?
There is a tab on the DIOCAL Bishop Search webpage, and I will put that in the chat now.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. Are there other questions at this point in the discussion about the process?
And I think the only thing we were going to address is what was going to happen on December 2nd. We're going to be doing electronic voting in here in the nave of the Grace Cathedral. It will be one agenda item is the election. The bishop will preside over the convention. There will be time for prayers in between ballots, and we will have plans to continue to closing at the end of a convention at 5 or 6 o'clock, I believe, right? And then afterwards, if we're unable to elect, we have another day set aside. So that's what the stance are there. Are there any other questions about the electing convention?
I'd like, if we have opportunity, to just walk through the special rules.
Oh, go right ahead.
Can we pull those up as a slide, Stephanie, on the Zoom chat?
I'm sorry, what?
It's Resolution D.
I see there's a question from Krista regarding the start time.
And the good news is it's the first rule. First of the special rules. So I'm going to start while Stephanie pulls those up. I'm going to paraphrase each of the rules, and it's important we do this because tomorrow these rules will be presented to the convention for further questions, discussion, and then ultimately adoption. This will be on our agenda tomorrow morning, immediately following the report of the standing committee. So the first rule is the location, time, and business of the special convention. As Warren just said, there will be one item on the agenda, and that is the election of our next bishop. And we will be meeting on Saturday, December 2nd, here at Grace Cathedral, convening at 9 o'clock in the morning. The officers of the special convention will be the regular officers of convention. And that includes our chair, Bishop Mark, will chair the electing convention. The third rule is that the electing convention will be in person only. There will be no provision because of how our constitution and canons are structured for remote voting at the special convention. Rule number 4 is lengthy, but what it essentially does is it digs into our constitution and canons about how our delegates who are eligible to vote are elected and raised up, and how credentials are handled. This is the normal way we handle credentials for all of our lay delegates. Likewise, rule number 5 about clergy who are eligible to vote at the special convention follows in exact content what it says in our constitution about eligibility to vote at any convention. Rule number 6, the quorum for a special convention to elect a bishop under our constitution is actually counted differently than the quorum for our annual convention. And this is worth talking about briefly. The quorum at our annual convention is calculated simply as a majority of our congregations are represented by lay delegates, and a majority of our congregations are represented by clergy delegates or clerics of the convention. In an electing convention, the bar is higher. It requires at least 2/3 of all our congregations to be represented by at least one delegate, and it requires a majority of all clergy who are canonically resident in the diocese and eligible to vote. Rule number 7 is basically a summation of the nominations process that Paul and Brenda just outlined that we have been through. This rule is here just to make it clear to the church that we have been transparent in this process, and that will be important for the consent once we elect our next bishop. The consent has to be received from the wider church in order for the bishop-elect to be consecrated. Rule number 8 is about preparation of the ballot. I think there are only a few of us who might be interested in such things, but there is a random process to determine the order of the nominees on that ballot and on each subsequent ballot as well. Rule number 9 is how the election will be held. It will be a vote by orders, which is true in all of our elections. However, unlike our annual convention, there is no second ballot where all the votes are totaled and then the simple majority wins. The election only occurs when a majority in each of the clerical order and the lay order is received by a single nominee. Rule number 10 outlines the voting process. And we will be using the same V-poll mechanism we have been using for the past 3 years at our conventions. The procedure for certification of votes is the content of rule number 11. This is a process that we expect to be very similar to what we have for our current elections in the annual convention, and that is we'll have a committee on elections that will have direct access to the voting results as they come out of ePoll to make sure that there's no interference in those results. And they will review those results, certify that they are valid, and then report them to me as secretary. And they will also be reported out to the nominees who can make determinations about going forward after each ballot. Once that has occurred, we will report the result of the ballot to the electing convention. If there is an election, we will report that. If there is not an election, we will report the numerical outcome of the ballot and then prepare for the next ballot. Rule number 12 concerns how nominees can withdraw from the election at any time during the election process. Rule number 13 is about extension of the special convention. It's a good idea simply to pencil into your calendar that if we need a second day to elect our next bishop, we will reconvene on 2 o'clock on the afternoon of Sunday, December 3rd, unless we decide as a body by a 2/3 majority to set a different time for our adjournment. In other words, if we decide to extend the time, if we feel we're close to an election on December 2nd, we can vote to extend the time into the evening. Rule number 14 is in the unlikely event that we fail to elect a bishop, and unless we agree to set another date and time to continue the election, we would adjourn and there would be no election. It's my understanding if that were the case, we would basically need to start over. We are not expecting or wanting to do that. So it is our determination and hope that we will elect. Finally, rule number 15 is in regards to rules under the Constitution and canons about how we attest to a due and lawful election of our next bishop. And that attestation will be filled out by our attending delegates and clerics at the electing convention. There's actually an online process now to do that, that is handled by the General Convention office. There is one question in Q&A right now. Will the 3 nominees be present at the elections? Warren, would you like to address that?
It's been the decision that the local nominee will be able to come in and participate and vote at the time of the electing convention. However, afterwards, we will be having him sequestered in a private room in between ballots. That's one. We have asked the nominees to not come to this locale and to remain in their local sites where they are in their home, and we will communicate with them electronically.
Another question is, will there be a prohibition of campaigning by candidates between votes?
We are asked the candidates to not take on any type of campaigning actively on the grounds of the cathedral or the electing area. I think that the information that has been shared from us with them is we also ask that they not do that on their own, that they think about allowing this to be an opportunity for prayer and discernment for the Diocese of California. So we're not asking them to do any active campaigning. That's the expectation we've laid out with them. Any other questions? Okay. Any other questions? Thank you for your time this evening on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you, Paul and Brenda, and to the whole Search and Transition Committee and the Standing Committee for an enormous amount of work this year to lead us through this process. We do have one more question. This is from Betsy Hata at St. Mark's, asking, does this include campaigning on behalf of candidates?
We can't tell you not to do that because there's no way we can adequately police for that. We ask that, you know, this is a discernment that is been established in this Episcopal election. We would hope that people would be mindful of honoring people's space. So therefore, if you choose to do that, sometimes that may backfire. So be mindful that there's a double-edged sword coming about here. And the other thing that will come up is, and this is where I struggle with, again, what will happen here in the election in the Diocese of California will be subject to review if somebody files a complaint or petition with the presiding bishop's office. And then the whole thing about the quality of the election and the consent will come up for challenge. And many of you heard that there were challenges, and we'll share some of that tomorrow in the election in the Diocese of Florida. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? Seeing no additional questions, we've come to the conclusion of our business this evening. Business is not the right word. Our discussions this evening, our business will be tomorrow when we reconvene. Again, a reminder that the convention the cathedral opens its doors at 7:30, and we will open registration at 7:45 in the morning. We look forward to seeing you then. I'd like to close with one of the collects for Compline. Let us pray. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous. And all for your love's sake. Amen. Thank you all again for being with us this evening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Make sure you travel safely. And we have a lot to cover tomorrow, and we look forward to being together.